You have to choose to be a man. You have to choose to harden yourself against a possibility that in this day and age may never come up. But I don't want to be the guy that when that situation might happen, whether it's a car accident and I need to lift a car hood off my wife or kids, or I'm dealt with a violent encounter, an active shooter situation, or I find myself stranded on the side of the road in the middle of a blizzard. Like, I don't want to be the guy that's wanting because I wasn't willing to place myself under voluntary hardship.
What's up, guys? I'm Zach, your host of the AUXORO podcast, where we bring you face-to-face with music artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, doctors, designers, and other interesting humans in a show that dives deep into the story beyond the surface. You can now support AUXORO with a donation on Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo. We're a completely independent platform with no outside sponsors or investors, and we're grateful for any amount, no matter how small, to help push the conversation forward. If you'd like to support, you can visit patreon.com/AUXORO, link in the podcast description as well. On Patreon, you get early access to episodes, discounts on merchandise, and other Patreon exclusive content. Thank you for your support. If you love keeping up with AUXORO, we have a newsletter sent out twice a month with all of our latest content, as well as other articles, podcasts, books, and advice that we find helpful. I'm constantly scrounging the internet for things to improve my life, and I would love nothing more than to be able to share the things that have helped me with you. Go to auxoro.com and join over 1,000 others by subscribing to the newsletter. The link is also in the podcast description. This episode is brought to you by The Aux. The Aux is a short-form podcast produced by AUXORO, bringing you a daily dose of uncensored wisdom to jumpstart your life. 10 minutes or less, no bullshit, no topic off limits. We explore topics like fashion, porn, relationships, meditation, and more. You can subscribe to this podcast by searching The Aux, AUX, wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I sit down with Ryan Michler, founder of the Order of Man, a community helping men master their relationships, health, wealth, and themselves. Having served as a soldier, a father, and a loving husband, Ryan knows what it takes to fulfill your duty as a man. To learn more about Order of Man, please visit the links in the podcast description or go to orderofman.com. Ryan also hosts a podcast by the same name and has written a book called Sovereignty, a battle for the hearts and minds of young men. It's a hell of a read, and if you're at all interested in what we are about to talk about on this podcast, I highly recommend picking up the book. In this episode, Ryan and I discuss the relationship between pain and trauma, what it means to be a good father, the growing concept of speech being equal to violence, Ryan's journey as a financial advisor, and more. Without further ado, please enjoy this deep and wide-ranging conversation with Ryan Michler of Order of Man. So I just want to say that I'm actually going through your book right now, Sovereignty. And
right on. Cool.
Yeah, it's a great book. I'm actually up to the battle plan right now, so I'm towards the end.
Yeah.
I breezed through it. There's a shit ton of underlines and notes, which I recently started doing because I felt like after I read something, I could only produce about 5% of what I just read. So I'm like, all right, I gotta change something up here.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah, I really enjoy your book. And I think a good place to kind of kick off this conversation is you are pretty open about relationship trauma and a period in your life where you went through a separation. And in my life, I've definitely experienced the pain and trauma of the breakup of a girlfriend. I've never had anything as serious as a committed marriage, but I have went through that type of period where it's kind of like you have this source of pain and you can decide what direction you want to take it. For you, what do you think it is about relationship pain that is such a source of transformation, especially for guys. There are a lot of guys in my life that I know that have adopted useful habits in the aftermath of a relationship. For you, what do you think is the source of that kind of transformational energy?
It's unfortunate because I think a lot of the times you don't really get woken up until something happens, right? Like we're in this default mode, the status quo. We kind of turn a blind eye to having to improve and get better until something somewhat catastrophic happens. And then we realize our own invincibility, or our lack of invincibility, I should say. And I think it's that causes us to improve, to get better, to shore up those weaknesses. And that wake up call is valuable. That's what happened for me anyways.
Yeah. It seems like there's just some extra, I don't know, something about going through the tearing apart of a relationship. You are so attached to someone to the point where maybe, like, I know for myself, I've been a little bit too codependent in the past. So it's like, I feel like a part of myself is ripping away with that relationship too. And it's hard to recover for that. And now I'm trying to take more of the approach in my life where I want to build a stable and exciting life for myself. And then as a byproduct, attract someone who wants to spend their life with me, and like, well, it'll be a support system. But especially back in the day when I was like, this relationship defines me, I did not know what to do for like the first 2 to 3 months. I was kind of like a lost soul, just like vengeful in many ways, which I regret.
Yeah, I think we wrap up our identity in our external relationships. And so, like you said, when that relationship dynamic changes, then it forces us to reevaluate who we are individually. But, like in my relationship, when I went through my separation, it was really the thought that I had to improve myself, that I had to focus on who I was, that I had to become a new man for the right reason, which is not for a woman, by the way, or anybody else. Not for your kids, not for a woman, not for boss or somebody you're trying to impress. Like, you have to become who you want to be for you. And what's interesting and somewhat ironic about that is that's what attracts people. Like, when you're sure about who you are and you improve yourself as a human being for the motive of just being able to love and respect yourself, people are attracted to that. That's what helped save my marriage. Is I went to work on myself because I wanted to be the best man that I could. And my wife was attracted to that. And so we ended up reconciling, and here we are 17 years later.
That's beautiful because, it's getting more of a rare thing for marriages to last that long. And yeah, you're right. The catch-22 of wanting to seem attractive to women and seem like that badass dude, but at the same time, not wanting to be needy and feeling like you need to attract that person into your life in order to validate yourself. It's like when a guy walks in a room that's really a badass, like, you just know that he feels like a badass. He doesn't have to say anything about it. You're just like, that dude, I'm not going to fuck with that dude.
Well, it's funny because most people call it the X factor. And, if you know math at all, X is a variable. It's an unknown variable, right? That's why it's called the X factor. You got to solve for X, right? The only people who don't know what the X factor is those who don't already have it, right? Like, they can't figure out what it is. And the guy who has the X factor knows that it's confidence. That's what it is. It's confidence. And confidence cannot be manufactured. Ego can, arrogance can. And so when somebody's full of shit and that person doesn't have the X factor. They just come across as a condescending dick. But the guy who has the X factor is the real deal. He has the real deal confidence, which means that he's earned it through competency, through hard work, through effort, through pain and struggle. And he's come out victorious. And that's what the unknown variable is. It's confidence.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, take advantage of that X factor and try to use it to sell back to people. Like, I know when I went through a breakup, this is about 3 years ago. I'm single now, but when I'm just Googling all this shit, like how to get back your girlfriend or like how to just seem like an attractive guy, there are all these courses or whatever that give you like this instant, get your girlfriend back in 2 days or like
Right.
2 weeks.
Right.
Just do these 3 things, like say these 3 things to yourself and she'll come back to you. And I think it's because it's part of the fact that X factor is so hard to define, that like, no, it's like this essence that you have that you can only get through pain and the shit that comes with a breakup, but then also using that pain in a positive way. Like it's not just an easy thing, but people definitely take advantage of that and say like, I have the X factor, whatever it is. People give it different names, and then, like pay $50 for this, and like I'll tell you how to get your girlfriend back.
No, but here's the deal. If you have to say you have the X factor, you don't have the X factor.
Yeah, it's like the badass. Like you don't have to say you're a badass.
Or Honest Auto Care. Like never take your car to a company called Honest Auto Care because they're lying.
Yeah.
Like they don't have to say they're honest if they're honest. It's the same thing. And that's why guys can recognize when somebody else has the X factor. If you recognize somebody has it, it's like, oh, well, and you recognize it as confidence, that's because you have it too. Like I wrote a blog post called, what did I call it? Fix Yourself First. I actually think I did a podcast on it because guys would ask me about my relationship. Mm-hmm. And they ask all the time in our Facebook group. We've got like 65,000 guys over there. And the overwhelming majority of posts that we have to look at are, how do I win my wife back? How do I get a woman? How do I, those kind of posts. And very simply, the answer is fix yourself, correct yourself. And then people will be attracted. Men, women, employers, clients, your family, your friends, neighbors, like everybody will be attracted to you if you focus on you. If you focus on them, like when I first went through my separation with my wife, I pinned it all on her. I said, if she would change, right? If she would do this and she would do that, and if only she was a quote unquote good wife, and if only she respected me and she changed this behavior and these attitudes, then our marriage would be great. Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
If anything, it drove a wedge between us. But when I decided to fix myself first, focus on myself, fix myself, correct my behavior, she was influenced by that. And by the way, I'm not saying that she didn't have things that she needed to work on. She certainly did. And she would admit that. But when she saw me improve, this is leadership 101. When she saw me improve, I influenced her to voluntarily want to improve herself. I didn't have to coerce her. She just wanted to be better because she saw that I was being better.
Yeah, it's like leading by example instead of telling someone, you need to do this. If someone else sees you becoming the things that you want to see in others, then it kind of like gives them permission to say, okay, if this person's doing it, they're not full of shit. So
right,
maybe I should start doing it.
Well, it's influence. So a lot of people think leadership is like getting people to do something. And yeah, that kind of is what it is. But it's not tyranny. It's not dictatorship. You're not forcing somebody to do something. The best leaders voluntarily get people to do things. And also in a lot of ways, make it seem like it's their idea. That's because they're allowing themselves to be influenced by a positive, influential leader, an example.
Yeah. And what you were saying about you and your wife both fixing things about yourselves, that reminds me of a joke that Bill Burr tells where he's saying that when him and his wife have discussions about what they need to fix, Bill Burr is like this building that's under construction, full of scaffolds, like falling apart. His wife is just like tearing into him about all the shit that he needs to fix about his life, which a lot of it he admits is true. But then when it comes to his wife and he says something, she's like this pristine skyscraper and like she never has to do anything. And she's like, everything is perfect about her already. So he's kind of like making fun of that stigma that it's always the guy that's working on himself in the relationship to raise to the level of whoever it is, the guy or the girl, like your partner.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a common understanding, right? But everybody kind of looks like shit when you really get under the hood. And everybody has room to grow. Everybody has an opportunity to improve and mature. That's what I look at. It's like I've just matured. And my level of maturity came when I took responsibility, not for her, or I should say, maybe responsibility is not the right, because that could be looked at as something else too, which I can explain in a second. But I didn't I didn't try to fix her. I just took responsibility for fixing me. That's a level of maturity. That ownership represents maturity. Because immature people, whether it's a grown adult or whether it's a child, they don't take responsibility for themselves. Like there's no consequences to their actions. They don't take responsibility. They shift blame. If things go wrong, it was somebody else's fault. That's what immature people do. Mature people take responsibility, own it, fix it, come up with some solutions, and make themselves and the project and whatever they're dealing with better.
Self-accountability is not sexy, I feel like, in a lot of aspects of today's society. Like it's, there's a lot of shit that comes with it, and it's not always easy. And I struggle with it myself. And you talk about it in your book as well, like make everything your fault and your responsibility, and you're actually taking control of your life. You're not giving other people control over you. When you say something is your fault, you're owning it. And it's just, I'm going through this book right now as well. It's called Coddling of the American Mind.
Yeah.
And I'm reading it at the same time as your book. And there's a lot of crossover between the two. And it makes me think of the college culture, the cancel culture, which is so pervasive now on a lot of college campuses, where you're basically taught the opposite of self accountability, and that you want to avoid the things that are uncomfortable. You don't want to take control over, this may be uncomfortable to me at the moment, but maybe there's something for me to learn here. It's kind of like everything is on the person that's hurting you, like quote unquote hurting, because you can't actually hurt someone physically with speech, but it's like all on the other. It's like this other mentality of like, this person is the other and they have nothing to say to me. I'm just going to cut off the conversation entirely.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's certainly easier to do that. Like you could look at it from two different sides. So look at it from the person who's being told that, right? If I'm going to tell you like, hey, the reason that you're not experiencing the results that you're after is not your fault. Like you're doing everything right. It's somebody else's fault. Then you feel pretty good about yourself, right? Because there's no inadequacy in your performance. It's somebody else's fault. So when they improve, then you'll get better. Or when they do their job or stop holding you down or making you the victim, then you'll improve. Now, if you look at it from the person who's perpetuating that lie, I think the reason they're doing it is well, it's selfish because it's not reality. And it's an attempt to maintain some sort of power or authority over an individual, right? Because if you're helpless, then you have to rely upon me, which makes me feel good, right? People rely on me. Like you could even think about that do you have kids?
No.
So you can think about that in the context of children. I have 4 kids. Like I actually take pride in the fact that I have responsibility for these 4 little lives who, quite frankly, would die without me.
Mm-hmm.
So I gain a tremendous sense of satisfaction and pride from that. But it would be selfish for me to keep them in this little bubble of mine that we've created for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 decades. That's a selfish thing. It's actually better for me to put them under some hardship and some challenge and hold them accountable and have some consequences in place, positive and negative, for their behavior. It's not easy. And also, I'm teaching them not to need me. As a father, that's not comfortable. But my job is to render myself obsolete. It's to put myself out of work. I want to be in a position where I'm wanted by my children, even as they're adults and they get into marriage and have their own families and they turn to me for advice. But I don't want to be needed. I don't want them to be hamstringed by our relationship. So I have to be willing to say difficult things, have real conversations, talk about uncomfortable topics like drugs and alcohol and pornography and sex, because that's what is required for them to be self-sufficient, fully sustained human beings. That's my job.
Hey guys, I wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to let you guys know that you can now support AUXORO with a donation on Patreon, PayPal, or Venmo. We're a completely independent platform with no outside sponsors or investors, and we're grateful for any amount, no matter how small, to help push the conversation forward. If you'd like to support, you can visit patreon.com/AUXORO. The link is in the podcast description as well. On Patreon, you get early access to episodes, discounts on merchandise, and other Patreon exclusive content. Also, you can go check out our merch at auxoro.com/store. We have tees and hoodies for sale, so you can listen to the show in style. Now back to the episode.
Most people are selfish. Like they don't want to deal with any of the hard stuff. So they'll just lie so they don't have to deal with it.
So how do you deal with having 4 kids when you are parenting them? They're under your control when they're at home, or if you're coaching them at sporting events, but then they go off to school and they're getting taught by people that may be full of shit, like maybe are great professors. There's a lot of good teachers out there. And I mean, there's also a lot of shitty teachers and shitty environments out there too, which is coming more to light, like with the whole, just like the whole cancel culture, like the bubble mentality where you think one way and I think the other. How are you kind of handling that in terms of parenting, knowing that other people are going to have part in molding your kids that you can't really control?
That's a great point. And the best thing that I've been able to do, and I can give some specific examples of this, is to teach them how to be thinkers. So now, granted, so I've got 4 kids. I've got an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. I'm not going to have in-depth conversations about how to think critically about subjects with my 3-year-old.
Yeah.
But I am going to say, hey, you need to eat all your dinner tonight, or you need to clean up your mess, because that's what a 3-year-old understands. But my 11-year-old, he might ask things about, he was reading a book last night. What did he ask? He was reading a book, and I don't even know what book it was. I have to look at it. He said, Dad, what's the global war on terrorism? And I said, well, where'd you hear about that? He's like, oh, I'm reading this book and they were talking about it. Okay, cool. Let's have a conversation. And then it's not just me teaching him or explaining things to him. It's me being more of a coach, which is guiding him towards being able to come up with his own solutions. So we need to learn to ask better questions. That's actually one of the unintended benefits of me podcasting, is I've become a great asker of questions. And I do that with the people I'm trying to teach. So I can lead them and guide them and instruct them and teach them what kind of questions they should be asking for themselves, so they can start to formulate their own answers. We talk about politics. We talk about money. It isn't simply me explaining things. It's me asking, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And allowing them to come and formulate their own conclusions. Because I don't want them to rely. So here's the interesting thing. If I want them to listen to me and take everything I say as doctrine without questioning it, then simultaneously what I'm saying is that other positions of authority, like school teachers, bosses, employers, etc., you should just accept everything they say without questioning it. If, on the other hand, I want them to question what other people are saying, then I have to allow them the flexibility and freedom to question what I'm saying. You can't isolate and pick and choose. Like, you either want them to question authority or you want them to subject themselves to it. But you don't get to isolate yourself from a position of authority as a father or a mother or whatever position you hold.
Yeah, it's like the whole "because I said so" thing when you tell your kid, and I've been told countless times by my dad when I was younger growing up, when he's just tired, over the line,
Yeah,
like
because
doesn't
it's
feel like
easier.
explaining. Yeah, and I understand where he's coming from, because he has 2 other sons too, and he's working full time, and he just wants to say, like, because I said so, like, now just fucking do it. And so I totally get that. But at the same time, I definitely had to, it definitely took me a little bit longer to explore my relationship with authority and like kind of get over, just because someone older than me is saying something to me doesn't necessarily mean that it's credible. What is their experience? What do they do? Do they take their own advice, and do they actually act how they're portraying themselves to me? And so the "because I said so" thing was, it was useful to get me to do what I had to do, me and my brothers at the time, because it was kind of like more of a scare tactic. But then I definitely noticed myself working through as a teenager, why am I so afraid to question this adult? Like, what is that sense in me that's telling me, like, just fucking do it, like, just fucking do it?
It's a form of tyranny. And I'm not criticizing your dad. I've said that too. I'm just saying it's a form of getting people to do. It's making them your subject. You just do it. Just do what I say. Doesn't matter what it means or what it represents or why it is. Just do what I say. I don't want my kids to think that. So, it's a challenge when you're tired and don't want to explain it, or have explained it 1,000 times. But so what? Welcome to fatherhood.
Yeah, my dad's great. I'm 20 years from now, I'll probably be saying the same shit and have
No
to
doubt. Of course
remind
you will.
myself. And that wasn't always my dad's response. Sometimes he would actually say, this is why I need you to do what I need you to do. Or he would say, "Because I said so." And then 20 minutes later, he'd come back and be like,
Let me explain this. Let me break this
I know
down.
I know I just fucking stormed off 20 minutes ago, but like this
Yeah.
is why I wanted you to do it. So it'd be like kind of roasting me and my brothers in the moment and then coming back and saying like, okay, now that I've cooled off, like this is why I wanted you to, take the garbage out every Wednesday or clean your mom's car, like whatever the
Yeah.
fuck it was at the
Sounds like a
time.
good father.
Yeah, he is a great father and I'm very grateful. So another thing that I wanted to get into, and I alluded to it a little bit before, is the whole speech as violence thing, because you joined the National Guard when you were 17 and you served in Iraq, you fought over in Iraq. And so you've experienced real violence in a way that not a lot of people, especially my generation, have as millennials, especially those who are not in the military or any of the armed forces. So when you hear people conflating speech with violence and discomfort with real danger, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's a softening of society, right? So like if, for example, the phrase that I don't like, or one of the phrases I don't like is verbally attacked or verbally assaulted. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't understand what
Yeah.
he criticized you. He called you a bad name. He or she didn't like your ideas. Like, what does verbally attacked mean? It doesn't mean anything. Now, I will say with a caveat here that we can call for violence with words, and that's certainly not healthy.
Yeah, it's protected in the First Amendment. You can't say, go kill
Exactly.
Zach or go kill Ryan. That's
Exactly.
illegal.
And that to me is different than somebody disagreeing you or with you, or even calling you a bad name. Like, okay, yeah, so you called me a bad name. That's it. Okay, well, I think I can live. So, when if we start doing things like, another one I don't like is vulnerability is strength. No, it's not. It may require some form of strength to be vulnerable in the right circumstances, but it isn't strength in and of itself. Like, words are powerful, so let's use them correctly. And I think when we start to redefine words or conflate definitions with things they don't really mean, it's just a tactic. It's a strategy to get people to do what you want. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of the verbally attacking, the verbally assaulting. Like, grow up, grow a spine. Like, if that's what you think is, if that's threatening you, if you're having a hard time with that, then life's going to be real difficult for you. It's all relative. So yeah, people call me names every day. They mock and ridicule and belittle what we're doing. And, I can let that stuff slide because I actually have like real things to worry about. One of them is being in battle and being in Ramadi in 2005. That gave me a new perspective as to what violence is. It gave me a new perspective as to what hate is. It gave me a new perspective as to what consequences of our actions and the actions of others are, and why we should defend ourselves and protect ourselves and fight for the things we believe in. And if somebody wants to swear at me or call me a name, like, that's the least of my worries.
Hey guys, this is a reminder that you can now follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at AUXORO. If you're on Instagram, it's at AUXORO. Twitter and Facebook is at AUXORO Mag. You can search AUXORO on all three and we will pop up. We post behind the scenes content and clips that you will not get anywhere else if you don't follow us on social media. And it also helps get the word out when you tag us, tag the episodes, and let other people know that you're listening to AUXORO. Now, back to the episode. As we're kind of in the midst of the whole cancel culture, I try to understand why students are feeling this way. I think I kind of escaped that because I graduated in 2015 when it was kind of starting to get going. And I was also playing baseball in college. So when I wasn't in class, I was at practice or lifting or at like team meetings and shit like that. So it wasn't like the typical college experience where you have all this free time to.
And you probably had coaches getting in your face and yelling at you and telling you how stupid you were and everything else. And you're like, oh, okay, well, these guys love me actually still.
Oh yeah.
Like,
I had a conversation with my high school coach the other day about how if he said the shit that he
could you
said
imagine?
today,
Yeah.
but to us, like parents and fucking people
Yeah.
would be calling for his head as the head coach, and which happens today. But I'm grateful that he would kind of take us aside after games and be like, "You guys played like fucking little bitches today. Like what's going on?" just kind of ripping into us. And he was a great coach too. It wasn't just constantly shitting on us. It was like shitting on us and giving us the skills to build
No,
it
that's
back
because
up.
you had the right motive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted you to, he knew what you were capable of. I had drill sergeants like that. They were just like, I thought they were just the biggest dicks, man. I'm like, why are these guys acting like this? But I realized it's their job. It's their job to break us down to a degree and then strengthen us. And that's what they're doing. So it doesn't mean they don't care about you. It doesn't mean they don't like you. Now, in some cases, our drill sergeants didn't. And that's fine because we didn't like a lot of them.
Yeah.
But it like you just don't need to take that stuff personally. And that's what most people do. There's a great book. I believe the author is Don Miguel Ruiz, who said the book is The Four Agreements. Have you read it?
No, but it's actually on my list in my phone on books to read.
Yeah, read that one or listen to it because it's a quick read anyways. It's pretty short. I'm just trying to pull up what the four agreements are. I know one of them is take things personally. That's what so many people do is like they take things so personally and they think that everything's about them. Like I had, for example, on Instagram the other day, I had done a video about just getting some of your finances in order. And it's pretty like generic advice. There wasn't anything like groundbreaking in there, earth shattering ideas. But I started the video with something like gentlemen, right? Like gentlemen, hey, you got to get your finances in order because we're talking to men. Like my organization's called Order of Man. And I had this woman come on and she's like, well, why is this directed at men? Like this should be for everybody. And I can't believe, she's like criticizing that I would say gentlemen when my audience is men. And I wrote back, I said, like chill out. Like not everything's about you.
Yeah.
Now, we run an organization called Order of Man where I give men tools and guidance and instruction and resources to help them thrive. Now, if you feel like something I say applies to you, then feel free to use it and share it. And hopefully it helps you thrive as well. But don't make everything about you. That's what a lot of people do. So the four agreements, that was the second one. Don't take anything personally. The first one is be impeccable with your word. The third one is don't make assumptions. And the fourth is always do your best. So it's a cool read. It's really enlightening.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. And while we're on the topic of don't take anything personally, I know you mentioned meditation in your book, and meditation is something that's definitely helped me not take things personally because before I started meditation, it was kind of just like reacting to everything, like a knee-jerk reaction. Someone calls me a name or does something to me. And then the first thing that comes to my mind, I just fucking say it without thinking about what that person actually just did or what I'm actually about to say. And I've just realized how many people are just walking through life in a shit mood or something bad might have just happened to them or they're really unhappy for whatever reason. And when they say something to me, it's more of a reflection on, okay, like, this person is in a fucking shitty mindset, whatever it is, something terrible, probably maybe just happened to them. Maybe they've been working a job they hate for 10 years. Maybe their girlfriend just left them or something. But that's a bunch of reasons why I don't have to take personally this dude that just shouldered me on the sidewalk and didn't say anything. Like I could just keep walking and, not be like that guy was watching me from a mile away and purposely was like picking me out of the 100 people in the streets of New York City and just like shouldered me. Like
how arrogant do you need, how arrogant do you need to be to believe that that's what that individual is doing?
Yeah.
Like, again, not everything's about you. Like I think about that when, occasionally I'll get cut off on the road or something like we all have. And my knee jerk reaction is like, oh, what, like just explode and like turn into road rage. But the benefit of the doubt, what I try to do now is, maybe that guy just got a phone call and his wife's in the hospital and she's on her deathbed. I don't know. I mean, that might be true. No, it's probably not. But even if it's wrong, if that's a wrong assumption, it's fine. Like I'll still get to my place on time. Like I can let that slide. I can focus my energy and effort on like things that are more important and it's fine.
Even if it's not true,
it just doesn't pay to take.
You're worried about yourself.
Right. And I've realized like how insignificant I really am. It feels good on the ego. Like we get this many downloads and this many people follow me on social media. But you know what? If I died tomorrow, like most people that quote unquote know me through the podcast or social media would forget about me in probably less than 2 weeks, maybe not even that long.
I don't know about that. I think the people that are in your community would still consume your content and think about you.
No, you're right. You're right to a degree. And the tighter your group goes, the longer they would think, the more impactful you are, right? So like my family, for example, my wife and my 4 kids, I would have the greatest impact on them if I died. But the wider you expand the circle, the less like you're really all that relevant. And people think like we're not special. Like we're not special. Now we can do great things and we can help and we should, but we're really not as special as we make ourselves out to be. And we place ourselves on these pedestals that we just don't belong. And it's exhausting, frankly. And it's delusional. It just sets you up for all kinds of failure.
How do you combat the feelings of ego or feeling too special sometimes? Because you've built such a large community. And that's one of the great things about podcasting is that you can start in your little corner of the world with a few hundred people that listen to your episodes, and then you can grow it into this massive thing. And then like your little corner turns into thousands, millions of people. While that's happening, how do you maintain perspective of, I'm just going to keep the same mentality as I started. Like I'll be grateful for every listener, every one person that clicks on the website. How do you kind of deal with that dichotomy?
Well, for me, I'm a pretty ambitious guy. So I don't feel like I've arrived at anything. And in fact, my wife and I talk about this quite often. I don't know that I'll ever feel like that, regardless of the relative success that we've been able to enjoy. So that alone, just being ambitious, keeps me humble. So I'm like, okay, great. You know, I got 100,000 downloads. Well, why don't I have 1 million? Okay, now I got 1 million. Why don't I have 10 million? Right. So like that alone, that level of ambition, like I don't really have to celebrate overly celebrate. I'm happy when I accomplish milestones and objectives, but I don't overly celebrate those things because I'm on to what's next.
Looking at the numbers, at least for me, kind of fucks with you sometimes if you pay too much attention, because it's good to have a pulse on your community and how many people are tuning in. And I kind of, I had that feeling and I didn't really know if anyone else was feeling that too. But I started out interviewing a bunch of music artists and they all said the same thing to the point where, you know, you don't know if a song is going to be a smash hit or not. All you can do is try to craft that song with the best of your ability and then release it out into the world. Maybe check on it once or twice, see how it's doing. But then more often than not, as soon as they release it, they're already working on the next song that day. And I really identify with that in podcasting. Like once you get it out there, that's someone else's episode. Like whatever they want to say about it, whatever they want to, you know, repost or comment, like go for it. I hope that it's helpful, but if you don't, or you have bad thoughts about it in some way, we live in a country with free speech. So say whatever the fuck you want and I'm on to the next one. Like I'm doing my best on the next one already.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, and that's a true artist perspective anyways. It's not about the result. It's about the creation. I think you want to create content, whether it's music or a song or a podcast or a painting or a sculpture or, I don't know, design clothes or whatever it is you do. Like that's what an artist does. He creates. And the feedback, yeah, we get wrapped up in it, but it's really irrelevant. If you're creating something that you enjoy and you find meaning in and purpose, and you find that there's a few people who are served by what you do, then man, you're doing it right. The other thing I do to keep my ego out of the way is I just try to maintain focus on my priorities, like which for me is my family. Like that's my greatest priority. So I do a lot of my business to throttle it back. Like there's a lot of opportunities that present themselves. There's opportunities and gigs and speaking appearances that I say no to, because if I say yes to those things, then that would come at the expense of me being home with my family. And I'm not interested in doing that. So when I look into my wife's eyes and I look into my kids' eyes and I see how much they need me and rely on me and need my support, then it's very easy for me to turn down these things that would stroke the ego, but wouldn't help me realize my priorities.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of not spending as much time with my family as I should have, especially in the beginning of podcasting, because I was pretty obsessed with it. And I realized I just wasn't hanging out with my brothers as I used to. And we didn't, we weren't bonding. There was like this disconnect. And I was watching a video of Shaquille O'Neal earlier today talk about the loss of Kobe Bryant, and knowing Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe's relationship, you would have thought that they were on the phone, you know, every other week talking to each other. And he was so distraught about the connections that he didn't maintain with people after basketball. And he's super busy. Like he's in, I think he's probably endorsed by every single insurance company on the planet and Icy Hot and like all this shit. So he's constantly working and announcing and things like that. And he kind of like had this really cathartic moment where he was just crying and one of the other guys started to say something and he cut him off. Shaq cut him off and said, "I'm not done." Like I maybe I've been evaluating things wrong in my life. Like maybe I've not been putting the things that I should have. And I was like, that just really hit home for me on a smaller scale, like just in my own life. Like his relationship with Kobe Bryant that he thought he was neglecting and Kobe's family and everything like that. Like that, I could at least understand a little bit of how he felt.
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever been a single human being on their deathbed has thought to themselves, "Man, I really wish I would have put more hours into the office."
No,
I really wish I would have done some things so I could have like 1,000 more subscribers or followers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are they saying? "Oh man, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. Wish I would have told my wife I loved her a little bit more. Wish I would have called my mom one more time."
Yeah, it's like always, we always regret the things that we didn't do. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And I mean, that's easy. It's easy in hindsight to like think about all the things that you didn't do. And regardless of what you did do, you're still going to do that. But just let it serve as a reminder to keep your priorities in check.
so for asking better questions, because I want to go back to that framework. And as a podcaster, that's something that I'm interested on a daily basis. I'm always trying to ask better questions, always trying to put myself in a position to be open to learning and doing the research to ask these types of questions. And just as a little bit of background on the process, when I first got into podcasting, I felt like I was obsessing over the research. Like I was in some ways preparing for episodes more than I needed to, or I just had pages and pages of research and I wasn't really focused on asking good questions. I was kind of just regurgitating information back to the guest, like that they already said. And it wasn't like me trying to discover something new. So I was wondering for you, what is your process like as a podcaster when you're trying to think of questions that will A, be interesting and B, get across a new perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of principles that come to mind. Number one, I have to genuinely be curious about an individual I'm having on the podcast. Because if I'm not really curious about what makes that person tick, it's probably not going to make for a great conversation. Because I'm not going to ask great questions because I don't care. And so it's going to come across. And when I started podcasting, I would have a list of like 10 to 15 questions that I wanted to get in. And I see podcasters do this. This is a novice approach, by the way. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying you should graduate from it at some point, where they'll ask the guest the same 12 questions or whatever it is. It's like, how disrespectful can you be? Like, you're going to hamstring your guest into these 12 questions. Like, you're going to keep them from exploring new things. Like, you don't really care about other things outside of these 12 questions. Like, it's a complete disservice to the guest you're having on. And it's a disservice to your audience. Like, your audience doesn't have a voice. You're the mouthpiece for your audience. So you have to do the job for them. Like, what would they ask? Like, have you ever listened to a podcast? You're like, "Oh man, why doesn't he ask more about that one thing? He moved on too quick from that."
Yeah.
Well, that means that podcaster potentially missed an opportunity. Now, you can't hit it all, but there's opportunities to look for different questions. That's why when I listen to podcasts, whether it's somebody else's or even my own, is I'm always looking for the avenue that wasn't explored. I'm like, oh man, that was a good question. Oh, what would I have asked after that? Oh, this guy said this. Or even if I'm listening to my own podcast, like, what did I miss? What little nuggets, what little information did I fail to extract? And what could I have asked to get that information? So curiosity is principle number one. Principle number two kind of falls in line with the same thing, but it's giving yourself permission from constraints. So if you constrain yourself to time or topics, oh, I got to make sure this guest talks about like this specific thing because this is the trend of the podcast and the conversation. I mean, yeah, you want to like steer it in the right direction. But if you have it so constrained into this like one avenue that you can talk about, then you don't give yourself permission to explore conversations that an individual's never had. Like, I had David Goggins on the podcast a year ago, actually this month, a year ago. And man, we talked about God. He didn't talk about God on other podcasts. We talked about race, expectations as him, a black man, and me, a white bearded guy. Like, these are conversations we had because I was curious and I freed myself from the constraints of like traditional questions that David Goggins always gets asked, like discipline and commitment and grit and resiliency and all that stuff. We talked about that too, but we explored some topics he hadn't covered. And that's why it was such a popular episode, because I gave ourselves permission to go there. So those are the two principles I use mostly when it comes to asking better questions of people.
Yeah, the curiosity for sure is something that kind of made me reform the way that I thought about podcasting, because I mentioned I initially started with music artists, and then there were a lot of potential conversations that were passing me by that I wasn't having because it didn't necessarily fit into the music corner that I confine myself into. And then I kind of just rebranded it more as this general, if whoever I'm interested in, if I see someone on Twitter or listen to a podcast or read their book, like whatever it is, I'm just going to reach out to them. And then I find myself becoming more curious after that initial curiosity. It's like I'm attracted to that person in some way. And then as I do the research, I find myself becoming more curious. And I'm like, oh, fuck, like I want to ask about this. Now I want to ask about that. And like all these, these different things that go on.
Well, I would actually commend you for starting, because what most people will do is they'll try to figure out like just the right way to podcast and just the right things and just the right people to talk to, and they'll never launch. So the fact that you were talking with musicians and recording artists as your initial entry into the podcasting world, and then it expanded from there, I commend you for doing that. I actually did the same thing. So I had a podcast most people don't know about, Before Order of Man. It was called Wealth Anatomy, and it was a podcast geared towards helping medical professionals with their finances. So I did about, I want to say 20 or so episodes, and realized very quickly that I loved the medium of podcasting, but I just wasn't interested in having the same old conversation about my job that I've been doing for a decade. So I switched gears. I pivoted, and Order of Man in March of 2015 was born. So very much the same thing as you. It's like we expand, we evolve, our interests change. There's other people that inspire us, and we need to give ourselves the freedom and flexibility to pursue those avenues.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you won't even find those avenues until you take the first step, right? It's kind of like going down a path in the woods. Like there's one trail, and you're like, I don't know, know where I need to end up or what the trail does, because you don't have a map. There's no map. So in order to see where the forks in the road are, you actually have to start walking down the path. And then when you come to a fork in the road, you make a decision based on the information you have at hand. Like you don't have it all then either. And you're like, okay, well, here's this path that goes to the right, and it looks, straight and somewhat mild and, kind of easy. And then there's this path over here to the left, and it looks rocky and misty. And like, I don't know if I want to go down that route. And so you start taking a path and a step, and, you gradually see what's in front of you, and you can go backwards if you need to and take another trail. Like you can be flexible, and you should be flexible, but you don't get to see it until you take the first couple of steps.
Yeah. And speaking of financial advising, when I was reading Sovereignty, you're obviously dealing with a lot of masculine traits, and you talk about how just because a trait is masculine doesn't mean that it's exhibited by only men, and just because a trait is feminine doesn't mean it's exhibited by only women. People are a combination of both. And
right.
I was kind of exploring that a little bit through the framework of a financial advisor. And I have a basic understanding of investing. I do a lot of investing in a few stocks, but mostly ETFs because I'm doing it for the long term. But there are a lot of masculine and feminine qualities that you need to be a good financial advisor. So for masculine, you would want to be assertive and direct in how you invest. You want to make a plan. You want to know what you're doing. You want to lead with your plan and
be decisive.
Stick that plan, be decisive. And then in times, for example, like when the market's shit, you want to be more still. You want to kind of like surrender to what the market is doing. You don't necessarily want to pull out everything you have because the market is going through a fluctuation. And correct me if I'm wrong, because that's I don't have a in-depth understanding on everything about investing, but
no, so far you're right on point. Yeah,
that's just something that I've come to understand. When you have a bunch of money that you're trying to save for the long term, you can capitalize on down markets. And a lot of times that's just leaving your money where it is, which through the framework of masculine and feminine, that would probably be the more feminine, like being still and not being over aggressive, like don't overreact and kind of like just letting things sit.
Or allowing your arrogance and your ego and pride to get into the way. Like women are going to be less subject to, generally speaking, arrogance and pride and ego, which tends to want to keep us from, experiencing loss, for example. So there's a lot of pressure that men place on themselves to perform. Women don't necessarily place as much pressure from that perspective. Women are also really good at relationships, right? So they'll start taking the advice of others and bringing people in to rally them around as a support unit. And people might think that that doesn't apply in finances, but look, if you're losing 10, 20, 30, 40% in your market portfolio and you're supposed to leave it there, if you isolate yourself, you're going to pull it out. You're just going to. But if you bring in trusted advisors and you let go of the ego and you listen to what these coaches and advisors and people are telling you, then okay, they're going to coach you through those difficult times and you're going to leave your money there. And history tends to show that those who leave their money alone do better than those who don't.
Yeah, I imagine as a financial advisor, you're playing the role of therapist a lot, where you might be on the phone.
Well, that's
with
what a good financial advisor will do. What most people think that a financial advisor is doing is managing their money. And a lot of advisors say that, well, I'm going to manage your money. I would say if you're looking for a good quality in a financial advisor, that yes, they're going to help you make financial decisions, but they're managing you and your emotions just as much, if not more so, than they're managing the portfolio. Because all advisors have access to the same information. Now, a lot of advisors will say, well, this one is proprietary and this one's ours. Well, they're only doing that so they can sell it to you. Like we all have access to the same information, right? The same funds, the same stocks, the same markets. It's the way that they're going to manage your expectations and your emotions when things are good and when things are bad that's going to prove their worth.
Yeah, I guess that's the downside of the automated investing, where it just perpetually puts in money for you and it adjusts the percentages, is that there's no human in your ear to block you from signing into your app and pulling everything out. You don't have that human element.
It's a great thing if you were a robot.
Yeah.
But you're not, right? So everybody knows the first rule of investing: buy low, sell high. And like everybody knows that. Nobody does that. Because what they do is that when the market's really high and doing well, or their friend says, oh, I got this stock and it's like doing amazing, you should invest in it. They're like, oh yeah, I should. Okay, let me do that. It's like, well, you just bought it like when it's high. And then when everybody's losing their shirt on a particular portfolio or fund or stock, oh, this thing's shit. Like I don't need this anymore. I'm going to get rid of this. And they dump it when it's low. It's like, that's when you should be buying it. It's all cyclical. So the beauty of these robo advisors and these platforms is that you get your own mistakes and human error out of the way. But then you don't have, like you said, you don't have anybody coming in and saying, hey, like chill. All right. Yeah, the market's down. Just chill for a second. Or the market's high. Like I want to buy all this. No. Let's buy the things that are doing bad. Like we know the rule. We shouldn't do that. But we need that help. Like we need that guidance. We need those advisors in our lives to point us in the right direction, and those who aren't emotionally tied to our decisions. Like you got so much baggage about your life that sometimes it's hard for you to see the direction you should go. Whether we're talking about relationships or career or health or money, there's so much baggage and noise and internal dialogue. You need an objective third party that isn't tied to the results of what it is you're trying to accomplish, because they can give you objective advice, not subjective like you tend to have.
Yeah, it's like there's a book I read a while ago when I first opened my own investing account. I think it was a random walk down Wall Street. And one of the main premises in the book was when a stock that's been a perpetual good performer is down, think of it like you're getting it at a discount. Like if you walk to a store and there's a $500 leather jacket on sale for $150, you go, hell yeah, I'm going to buy 3 of those. And then hopefully it appreciates, and it's maybe take 4 or 5 years. But to think of it that the stock still has a certain future value and you're getting it for much lower in the present.
Right. No, like in any other context, nobody buys things when it's overpriced. Mm-hmm. Like you wouldn't, like to take your leather coat example. You wouldn't go into a store And traditionally the coat's worth, $500, but they say, hey, great news. We've marked it up to $750 today. And you're like, sweet, I'll buy it for $750 when it's only worth $500.
Mm-hmm.
You would never do that in any context. But when it comes to the stock market, people do that all the time.
One of the things I was thinking about when I was reading Sovereignty is a lot of this stuff. It seems like most of the people I talk to, most of my friends would agree with this. A lot of the principles in the book that you walk people through, I think most people would agree with, but you are at the ground zero of debate for manhood, which I'm sure invites a lot of dissenting opinions and people that are just extra charged going into the conversation, that are looking for debate and for whatever reason, it's just, you're kind of like in this exaggerated space for manhood debate because that's the nature of what you do.
Right. I mean, and what a great place to be, right? Like where people are hopped up on this stuff.
Yeah. What's some of the typical blowback that you get or some of the most common criticisms you get about what you write?
I actually don't get a whole lot. Well, I should say it this way, from rational people, right? Like even women, love what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're looking for real men. Like, a genuine woman would really, really appreciate a genuine man. So they're not looking for wimps and weenies. Like they're looking for masculine men because that's what complements feminine women. So we don't get a lot of pushback, but I get things like misogynistic and toxic masculinity, and these little buzzwords that people like to throw around, and then you hear things. This is fringe thoughts, but well, women can be men too because of gender. I was like, no, like the biological requirement is the prerequisite for being a man. Like you have to be biologically a male before you can be a man. Now, granted, to be a man takes a bit more than just being biologically male, but that is the prerequisite. So people like to debate me on that. And then, like I said earlier, is like, well, why isn't this for everybody? Why is it just for men? Why are you excluding women? Not excluding women. I just happen to be talking to men. If it applies to you, then utilize it. But these are irrational people. These are emotionally charged people. A lot of times they're ignorant people who are maybe they were damaged or hurt by men in the past. And so they haven't learned how to compartmentalize their one experience or handful of experiences with an infinite number of possibilities that could actually play out the other way. So they've never healed from the trauma of abuse or neglect or whatever it may be. Or they've just been conditioned through pop culture to believe that men are the enemy and that we live in a tyrannical patriarchy, which obviously isn't the case. And so then they continue to perpetuate that lie and find examples as to why that's the case and choose to ignore and overlook the cases where it clearly is not how this world works.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm not a feminist, but I love women, is because I think the current wave of feminism, fourth wave feminism, whatever you want to call it, is hurtful to women. And there's a lot of just anti-men rhetoric. It doesn't make sense, one, because a lot of it is not grounded in truth. And two, it's like a rising tide lifts all boats. When men are doing well, it's better for women. And when women are doing well, it's better for men. It's like we feed off of each other. So it's like the other mentality that we were kind of talking about before. Like if you're painting men as the common enemy, then shit's just going to get worse. And same thing for all the guys out there that say like, fuck women, like they're the source of all my problems. It's just not a productive mentality to have.
It's immature too. Like we have this MGTOW movement and the incels at the opposite end of the spectrum that it's basically the masculine equivalent of fourth wave feminism. I don't even like that term feminism. It's like, what does that even mean? Because some people think it means that you think women should be treated equally. Okay, I can get on board with that. And then other people.
Yeah, that's what it started as. It started as women having the same rights as men, which of course is what needs to happen and did happen. But then it started to evolve into this kind of weird space of, well, now women need to be the same as men. And we're going to erase the biological differences between men and women. If I'm kind of thinking about it from like an evolutionary standpoint, for thousands of years, women being different than men meant that they were second-class citizens. They didn't have the rights of men. So I kind of get the mentality of, well, if men are different than women, if we point out these differences and we accept them, then what if it goes back to women being second-class citizens? But I think now we're at the point where we can celebrate those differences and see them as feeding off of each other, and that we're both equals in society, but we're not the same. And that's what makes shit run so well.
Well, you got to be careful with the word equal, right? Because equal means the same. Equal, like it, but it doesn't always look the same.
Equal, I would say equal opportunity. I would say
equal opportunity, equal in worth and value, but certainly not equal. Take an individual level. I'm better at certain things than my wife is, and she's better at certain things than I am. Does that mean she's of more worth, or I'm of more worth, or she's inferior, or I am, or superior? No, it just means that we're better at different things. And cool. I'm glad we found each other, because I can compliment her and she can compliment me. That actually works out pretty well. It's a good arrangement. That's why men and women are attracted to each other. And this is also the reason why I kind of laugh and have a hard time with the men who say, well, I just don't understand women. Right. You're not supposed to. Because if you understood, then you would be a woman. And women aren't ever going to fully understand men. Why? Because you're not a man. You're not supposed to understand. Your makeup is not designed to understand. You can take this at the most fundamental level. Now, let's go back to kids, for example. So my youngest son, he's riding his bike and he falls off his bike and he scrapes his knee and he starts crying. Well, what's the woman going to do? She's going to run over, pick him up, kiss his boo-boo and his owie and put a Band-Aid on it when it probably doesn't need a Band-Aid, and coddle him, right? Carry him around and dote on him for the rest of the day. What's the dad going to do? It's get up. Rub some dirt on it. Get up, get back on the bike and keep going. What's the problem? Quit being a little baby. Neither one of those are wrong. Now they can be taken to the extreme. Both, by the way. The father, and I'm talking about generalities here, but the father can take it to the extreme, right? And so can the woman. So the idea is that we check each other. So my wife runs over there and I say, hun, just stop for a second. Let him get up. And if I'm being too hard, she's like, hey, just ease up, relax. Let me just help him up. And we check each other so that we keep our parameters of the way that we act and respond to circumstances in the proper framework that will actually help our child. Because me just being a tyrant and a dictator and a bully is not going to help. And her overly babying him and coddling him and never letting him experience any hardship is not going to help. So we've got to check each other. And that's why I'm okay with not fully understanding where she's coming from. And she needs to understand, not that she's not going to fully understand where I come from. That's fine. I'm okay with that.
How would it fit into the framework if, say, you have a husband and wife where the wife may be the more masculine one in the relationship and the husband, for whatever reason, is just not the one who lays down the law in the house? How do you see that fitting into the order of man framework?
Cool. If it works for you, all the power to you. I'm not going to tell an individual or a family or a couple that their dynamic doesn't work. Again, to go back to my arrogance, how arrogant would I need to be to say, well, you shouldn't do it like that. It may work for you, but that's wrong. I don't care. If that works for you, then all the power to you. Now, when I talk about what it means to be a man, I say a man is a protector, a provider, and a presider, a leader. So if he's fulfilling those roles, or he's on the path of fulfilling those roles, then I think he's stepping into his masculinity. And I think he's on the path of being a man and calling himself a man. If he's neglecting that, if he's shirking those responsibilities, then yes. Now, the way that we go about those things is going to be different. I know plenty of men who I wouldn't consider, for example, the warrior archetype. But does that necessarily mean they're less masculine? No. I mean, if they're a protector, a provider, and a presider, and they're fulfilling those roles, then all the power to you. And I wish you luck and success, and I hope it works out for you. And I want you to thrive as a man and your wife to thrive as a woman and raise healthy kids and be good members of your community and get after it.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, look, here's where I see my role. When men don't know how to be men, they're conflicted about that. They don't feel like that, because there's a lot of guys who say, man, I just don't feel like a man. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. They're aimless. They have no direction or purpose and clarity and focus in their life. That's where I feel like I can really offer some assistance and guidance. But if a guy comes to me and he's like, like I'm happy, we have a good dynamic. I'm not the most masculine man necessarily, but I go out and I work. I love my kids. My wife and I get along. She tends to be more decisive in the relationship, and I acquiesce to that. Like, cool. If that works for you, get after it. That's great.
When I was going through the book, I was looking for things that maybe we might disagree on. And I find value in all the principles that you laid out. I think if there was anything that I disagreed with you on, it would be the source of softening of the manhood. And I know you've alluded to the Industrial Revolution of fathers going to work and not having the father figure around as much. And I think that has something to do with it. But I also see the fact that men have been working for thousands of years in different ways, whether, it was hunter gathering, or they were going into battle for months at a time and coming back home, where the mother figure was all that was around. So I was trying to think of if there was maybe something else that was leading to the softening of manhood. And two things that came to mind were the washing away of the biological differences, which we spoke about, because how are you supposed to know what it is to be a man or a woman if those things become the same? And two, the lack of gender specific, the lack of gender specific spaces kind of goes into the biological differences. And two would be the absence of, like people have called it free range childhood, where you're kind of letting your kids go out and explore, and they fuck up, they ride bikes around town, and they do whatever they want. And the parents aren't as much of helicopter parents. And with the rise of crime in the 90s, that kind of went away a lot in society, where parents started overprotecting their children, I think, in a lot of ways. Do you see anything else besides the Industrial Revolution that you could point to for the softening of manhood, or is that pretty much it for you?
No, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I also think an element is just the ease of modernity, right? It's like, what hardships do we have? Somebody cuts you off on the road. Somebody puts the wrong flavor in your mocha frappuccino. Like, you don't have any hardship. You're cold, you turn on the air conditioning. You want food, you go to the grocery store. You're upset with somebody, you like block them on Facebook. Like, what hardship do you have? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to voluntarily place yourself under hardship. So these people that complain about masculinity and manhood, the only reason they can complain about it is because men have made it easy for them to do that, because we've neutralized the threats. Like, you're no longer being chased by saber-toothed tigers. The likelihood of you having to deal with a violent encounter is significantly lower than it's ever been. Our medical technology and advancements have completely eradicated certain illnesses and disease. Like, we have this coronavirus going around right now. I'm fully confident that will be neutralized. 100 years ago, I wouldn't have been so confident that that's the case.
Yeah, half of Europe would have been wiped out.
Already, right? So, like, what threat do you have? And what reason do you have to be strong? You have no reason. No reason. You have to choose to be a man. You have to choose to harden yourself against a possibility that in this day and age may never come up. But I don't want to be the guy that, when that situation might happen, whether it's a car accident and I need to lift a car hood off my wife or kids, or I'm dealt with a violent encounter, an active shooter situation, or I find myself stranded on the side of the road in the middle of a blizzard. Like, I don't want to be the guy that's wanting because I wasn't willing to place myself under voluntary hardship. And most people live in such a soft, comfortable, pathetic life that there's no reason to be a man. My friend Jack Donovan, he says this. He says, in this day and age, you have to choose to be a man. It's no longer a requirement. You have to voluntarily decide that I'm going to place myself under hardship, that I'm going to do it in spite of nobody else asking me to or requiring me to. There's nobody holding me accountable. There's no test that I need to pass like the Spartans used to do with their Spartanagogy with young men.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to voluntarily decide to do it and then hold yourself personally accountable to actually doing it. So this ease of modern times has made people very, very soft. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are in for a rude awakening when things get difficult, and they will. It's all cyclical. Things are going to get tougher, and a lot of people are going to find themselves incapable of dealing with it.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of that hardship came in the form of athletics. And
Yes.
when that ended, when my college baseball career came to an end, and I kind of found myself in this limbo period where I was ready to start the next phase of my life, but I didn't have anything in the form of competition. I wasn't feeling the same nervous energy and, butting heads and just getting after it in sports from my job and from my daily life. And this was probably about 12, 13 months ago. I made a list about a lot of things that I just wanted to invite into my life that you could consider voluntary suffering. And it was things like public speaking, learning a martial art, getting comfortable with firing a weapon, like a bunch of things that I had never done or never done on a consistent basis in my life that I just wanted to do, because I just realized after baseball, like I didn't even have to think about the competitiveness aspect. It just kind of became a part of me.
Right.
And when I lost that, I was like, I need to, like, no one's going to tell me to do this anymore. Like, I'm not going to have a coach tell me, like, you need to fucking get your shit together. I have to invite people.
Right. Or a team holding you accountable because the victory, because the victory mattered, or you were a variable of that victory, right? Like that's not there anymore.
Yeah, like I needed to invite more ass kicking into my life and other people, I guess coaches in a way, that are going to hold me accountable. Like my coaches in baseball used to, whether it's, going to Toastmasters or learning jujitsu, like just things that are going to make me suffer so that when I go through involuntary suffering, it's not going to seem as bad. It'll still suck, but it's not going to seem as bad as if I was just, getting home at 5 o'clock every day and then packing it in, then going to sleep.
Right. Yeah. And what's funny is these weak and pathetic people who are soft, they'll actually make fun of you for doing it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they'll make fun of you for signing up for a Spartan race and paying money to go suffer. That's what they say. Oh, I can't believe you pay money and you're going to go get your ass kicked. Like, why would you do that? Well, when shit hits the fan and you aren't capable of dealing with it, then maybe you'll understand why I decided to do that.
I get that from most of my former teammates. Don't really give me shit. I'm lucky that I went through school with a good group of guys, but
they don't, because they understand what it's like.
Yeah.
So they're not the people I'm referring to. I'm just referring generally to these people who maybe didn't go through that experience or see why it's important to harden yourself against life.
Yeah, but even in that group of teammates, there are a few guys that will give me shit for going to work out or do something physical. They're like, we don't need to do that anymore. We're not playing baseball anymore. And I'm just like, don't you want to like go hiking and be fit and snowboard? Like I want to be able to do the activities that I love, the physical activities that I love until I stop breathing, whenever that is. I love snowboarding. Right. I love hiking. I would be an idiot to think that I can just wake up and do that and not have to do mobility exercises, not have to do some sort of weight training, like things that will just give me a better quality of life. And I was actually surprised, like some of the guys that I talked to that were in some of the best shaped dudes I've ever been around with are like haven't picked up a weight in 2 years. And it kind of like blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I think it's easy to rest on your laurels, right? At one point you were good, and so you think you always will be. But being good, being strong, being fit, being capable, those are all perishable skills. And so if you aren't finding a way to continue to hone into those things and develop those skills and those practices, then you're getting softer, you're getting weaker by default. So it's something you need to actively fight against.
So what I wanted to end on is the part of the book where you talk about giving yourself permission to experiment. In your life at the moment, are there any sort of instances or routines that stand out that you're experimenting with right now? Or maybe you've done things a certain way for 2 years and right now you're thinking of like, oh, maybe I should change up my routine a little bit, or maybe I should add this in. Anything like that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, a huge one is I moved to Maine 7 months ago. Like, I had no good reason to be out here. I dragged my wife and my four kids. I say dragged, I didn't. We decided to collectively go, but I wouldn't have dragged them if they didn't really want to. But, I was able to influence them and get them on board. And here we are. We had no good reason to be out here, man. We knew like 7 people. They would say we knew the best 7 people, and that's true. Now we know, of course, a lot more, but yeah, we drove across the country with 4 kids to move to a place where we knew 7 people. We invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into not only the property, but improving the property. We're running events from here. And I don't know if this is going to work out. I don't know if this is where we're going to stay indefinitely. And I've had so many people say, "Oh man, I wish I could do that, but I've got work and I've got this and my kids are this." And like, it's as if we don't have those sacrifices. Like we don't have those variables and those factors to take into consideration. Of course we do. Everybody does. Everybody's got a job. Everybody's got friends that they'd have to leave or family that they'd have to leave. Everybody has memories and responsibilities and difficult conversations they'll need to have. So like, it's always amazing to me when people say, well, I can't do it because, and then they give the same like reasons that we had to deal with. You can do it. And look, I don't want to be the guy who in 20 years is talking with my wife from the place we've always lived and saying, yeah, you remember that one time we were going to do that one thing, but we were too scared to do it?
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the guy that says, look at where we are. Like, imagine if we never took advantage. Remember when we were talking about doing this and we thought maybe we shouldn't, but we did it anyways? And like, look at us now. That's what I want to be. And so we're in the middle of that right now. And so far it's playing out pretty well. It's got its challenges, it's got its struggles, and we've stumbled along the way, but man, what an amazing experience that we're part of right now.
Where were you moving from?
There's a great example. Utah, Southern Utah.
What made you pick Maine?
We liked it.
That's good enough.
I came out here. Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm saying. It's an experiment. I had no good reason to be out here. I had never been to Maine before. So I came out in, I want to say it was like August, September of, it would have been, 2018, and fell in love with it. Sending pictures and videos back to my wife. I came out here for a week-long jiu-jitsu camp. And she says, yeah, of course, it's beautiful now. It's the fall in Maine, of course. So I said, well, let's go back out in the winter. So her and I came back out in the winter, December of 2018, and she fell in love with it. And long story short, we ended up finding a house and a property that we just absolutely loved. We came down this hill and the heavens parted and the clouds separated and the angels sang hallelujah. And we're like, well, that's the place. So we put an offer in on it, and it took us, between getting the financing in order and getting everything closed and taken care of, it took us 6 months to get ourselves out here. And we moved out here in, I think it was July, end of June, beginning of July. And here we are 7 months later, and the place that, again, we had no good reason to come to, but here we are nonetheless.
Perfect. That's beautiful.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's good.
And Ryan, thanks again for hopping on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I had a blast with this conversation, and I hope you can say the same. This was fun for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I wanted to tell you something because you were asking about asking good questions and being a good podcaster. I got to tell you, man, like, you're on it. You're solid. Like, I've done a lot of podcasts with other people, and a lot of times it's awkward, and you can tell they're just getting started or uncomfortable or don't really know how to lead the conversation or have a discussion. And that's certainly not you. You do a wonderful job, man. So I'm excited to see where you take this thing.
Thank you. I'm glad it comes off that way. I've definitely evolved in how I ask questions and kind of lay out my preparation for the episode, because I definitely was that awkward dude that was sticking to the same 12 questions when I started.
It's part of the tuition of getting good at this game, man. And you're certainly doing a great job.
Thank you. And I just wanted to tell you, before I go, you have one of the most majestic beards I've ever seen. When I was watching your interviews, it just made me more conscious of how follically challenged I am in some areas of my face.
I feel like sometimes people aren't listening to me. I'm just like hypnotizing them with my beard, and that's why they tune in.
I mean, there's definitely an aspect of that. When you see a great beard, there is some sort of hypnotist, just like this element of where maybe you're having like you can think something about someone because they have a great beard, and it kind of like distracts you in a way, which is also just part of the essence of having a great beard. Like that's why people love it, because it like projects this certain swagger about you.
Have you ever seen Catch Me If You Can? It's an older movie
With Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Yeah.
Yes, and Tom Hanks. And then Christopher Walken, who's Leonardo DiCaprio's dad, says, you want to know why the Yankees always win? And Leo says, it's because they have Mickey Mantle. And he's like, it's because the other team can't take their eyes off the pinstripes. And that's what it is. I'm able to hypnotize these people. It doesn't really matter what I say. I just hypnotize them with my beard, and that's why we win.
Yeah, you have the pinstripes on your face.
That's right.
That's why I didn't do video for this podcast, because I was trying to take away the hypnotist effect. But yeah,
there you go.
Thank you again for hopping on the podcast, and I'll link to wherever people can follow you, where they can buy your book, website, Instagram, everything like that in the intro and the show notes, and I'll keep you updated on the release.
Right on. Thanks, brother. I appreciate the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Of course. Have a good one, Ryan.
You too, man.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of AUXORO. If you haven't already, please hit us with a 5-star rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. This helps us appear higher in searches, which means more people will find out about AUXORO. Other ways to help get the word out is telling a friend, tagging us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, writing a blog post, or supporting us with a donation on Patreon. We are a completely independent platform, and we're grateful for every listener who supports this podcast. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and I'll see you guys next time.